Hey guys, it's Caleb, welcome back. So in today's video I wanted to bring you along and show you the feijoa hedge that we've got growing here. This is one that I planted around a year ago and I made a video all about that. But you guys have been asking me how it's been doing, and it's actually been doing really well. It's got quite a lot of fruit on it. You can see some fruit just down there on the ground. Hopefully you can see that, but I'll show you shortly. And yeah, it's been growing pretty well, and I've been doing some sort of observations lately just to kind of get some idea on what works, what doesn't work with feijoas. So I wanted to share some of those observations with you today to hopefully help you get started with growing feijoas, or give you some tips to kind of apply along the way with your growing. So let's just get right into the video and come and have a look at the feijoas with me. So if you remember, this is how the trees looked when we first put them in compared with how they look now. So the trees have grown up quite a bit and they're all looking really nice and healthy, and because it's autumn now as well, the fruits are starting to ripen up and drop off the trees. One of the things a lot of people recommend with fruit trees is to take off a lot of the fruit for the first year, just to allow the tree to get its roots down and established and start to grow a bit more, as opposed to spending a lot of energy creating the fruit. And what I've done is not followed that. I've kind of just let them do what they want to do. And so some of the trees didn't produce any fruit at all, and some produced quite a lot, and then there was others kind of in between where they just produced a handful of fruit. And so I just wanted to do a bit of an experiment to see if the trees that didn't grow any fruit on their own would end up growing bigger or faster than the trees that had a lot of fruit on them. There doesn't seem to be much of a difference, if any at all. Most of the trees are about the same size despite the amount of fruit they have on them, and in fact the largest tree that's in this line is one of the trees that has the most fruit on it. So although it's got a lot of fruit, it doesn't seem to have affected its growth at all. And I think probably a lot of the reason for that is that these were planted back in autumn, so they had all of the autumn and winter to establish and get their roots down. And once they flowered, they were already established enough to be able to hold those fruits and go through the summer without being affected. Whereas if I were to plant them in the springtime, it would probably be a good idea to take the fruit and the flowers off at that stage, because they're going to be fruiting straight away and you've only just put them in the ground. So if you're planting them in the spring, I would probably take the fruit off just for that first year, and it's only going to be another year until they flower again and you might get some fruit off them. But it's really up to you if you decide to remove the fruit or not. But do you want to have a look at this fruit? I'll bring it in a little bit closer and I'll open it up and see what it looks like. Yum. So there we go. I'll give it a taste. Really, really juicy. It's a bit hard still and it's quite a sharp flavour, but I really like feijoas when they are more of a sharp flavour as opposed to being super sweet. And the other thing with feijoas is I like to eat the skin as well, so it does help to balance out the sweetness of a feijoa, so you can just eat the skin, just like that. Nothing like a homegrown feijoa. And just like these ones, because they're on the ground, that means they're ripe. So once they've dropped off and you feel a little bit of softness to the skin, then they're good to eat. Otherwise you can give the tree a gentle shake, and any that fall off, like this one just did, that means that they're ripe, and you can see that there's a little bit of give there to the skin, so it's good to go. I believe one of the most important things when it comes to growing fruit trees, and particularly feijoa trees, is having a good amount of mulch underneath them. So what we've got here is just some arborist mulch. It's just basically chewed up trees that have gone through a mulcher with leaves, bark, branches, all that kind of thing. And this is slowly breaking down and providing nutrients to the trees, but more importantly it's providing a really good environment for the roots that's moist, it's cool during the hot summers, and it's a bit warmer in the winter for them as well. And feijoas do have really shallow surface feeder roots, and so it is important to protect those roots from those kind of harsh elements of drying out, getting saturated, all that kind of thing. Whereas if you have a good mulch, it's really going to stabilize the soil, reduce the amount of weeds that you're going to have and things like that. And what we've found is that we haven't actually had to water our feijoa trees all summer. And it probably would have benefited them to water them. I'm not saying don't water your trees, especially in their first year. I'd say it is pretty important to. However, like you can see, we've got quite a bit of fruit on these feijoa trees without the need to even water them once, despite having some long periods of drought and the ground being super dry even right next to the trees. But what I'm quite keen to do is just dig through this mulch. We'll have a bit of a look together at the soil underneath this mulch, and then we'll dig a hole right next to the feijoa trees just on the bare soil that's next to them, and just compare the soil to show how much of a difference that mulch makes, and hopefully there is a bit of a difference. So come on in and we can take a bit of a look. So digging down into this mulch here, you can already see that we've got surface roots of the feijoa just through here. and they, you know, the ground is, there's quite a bit of moisture in it. There's a little worm just here, you can see that, and another one just there. If I get a bit of it, you can see that there's actually a good amount of moisture in there. It's nice dark soil, looks really healthy. The ground's, you know, you can break it up with your hand. It's not like a dry dust bowl or a dry hard compacted soil. You know, it's easily pliable, it's quite good. So to compare, let's just have a look at the ground just next to where we just dug. So we'll come over here and we'll just see what it's like. Check that out. It's dusty, so super dry. So, you know, you can see how much of a difference that mulch has made. This ground is just like, honestly, just dust and hard compacted dirt. So yeah, mulch is very, very important, and I always advocate for that around your fruit trees. It will help so much. The tree will stay a lot happier. I wanted to point out this tree to you here. So this is one that we bought from the nursery for $25, whereas all of the rest of the trees along here were only $10. And the reason for that was, well, we got it from a different place, but also this was a larger tree at the time. But what I've found is that all of the other trees have, you know, provided quite a bit of fruit, and some of the trees have actually overtaken this tree now in size, and most of them are actually around about this size anyway. And so kind of what I wanted to indicate to you guys is that although this tree was, you know, 2.5 times the price of the other trees, it hasn't provided one fruit at all this whole year, and it hasn't even grown very much either since we planted it, whereas the other trees have established a lot better and a lot faster and have just pumped their roots out, pumped the growth out, and pretty much caught up to this tree here. So I kind of just wanted to show you that, you know, if you're deciding between a tree that's maybe this big and then one that's a little bit bigger but a lot dearer, then I would recommend just maybe going for the smaller tree if you want to save some money, but also get a tree that's going to probably outcompete this tree, or at least catch up to it within a year or two anyway. So this tree here is easily the smallest tree that we've got in the whole hedge, and there is a reason for that, and that's because the whole tree snapped in half. So what happened is the ties that were around it ended up coming off when we had a lot of wind, and the whole tree just snapped. There was not one branch, not one leaf, anything like that left on the tree. And I was a bit gutted at first, but I knew that it would probably bounce back anyway, because feijoas are super hardy. They don't mind a really heavy prune, and yeah, they're just very resilient trees. So although it didn't have any leaves, it's fully sprouted back. All I did was just chop it off at the top so it was a nice clean cut, and then it's just sprouted all these new branches. So although it has slowed the tree down, and this is still a lot smaller than the other trees, I would say that probably within the next year or two it will be caught up to all the rest of the trees, and you know, you won't even notice that that had happened. But one thing that I think is important to note with feijoa trees, and any fruit tree really when it comes to staking, is that you do want to allow your tree to have quite a good amount of movement anyway, especially if you're in a windy site, because this will mean that the tree will be able to respond by putting out stabilizing roots, by thickening up in the trunk and branches, and because it knows it's in a windy site, it's going to respond like that. Whereas if you tied it really super tight against a stake and didn't allow any movement, then the tree's never going to know that it needs to, you know, get a lot stronger and resilient to survive those strong winds. So yeah, make sure when you tie them that they still have a really good amount of movement, but not so much movement that they bend right over and then end up snapping off like this one did here. If you're planting a feijoa hedge like we have here, one thing to consider is the size of the varieties that you're planting. So these two trees here are actually more of a smaller variety. They're called Wiki 2. So what we've done is made sure we've put these two on the end of the hedge, and we've also put them on the northern end. And that's where all of our sun comes from here in the southern hemisphere. So having them on the northern end is just going to make sure that they get plenty of sun, and they're not going to get shaded out by other trees, and they're also not going to shade out ones that are larger further down. If you're planting feijoa trees as well, it's also a good idea to have at least 2 trees just to help with cross-pollination. They'll do a lot better that way. Even the self-pollinating varieties like Unique will benefit from having another pollinator tree. It's also a good idea to just look at the variety of tree that you're buying and when it's going to fruit. You can have sort of early season, mid-season and late season feijoas. So if you're planting at least 2 trees, you may as well get kind of an early season and a mid-season, or an early and a late, so that you can span the amount of fruit that you get over a longer period of time. So in terms of feeding your feijoa trees, what we've done is, well, actually me lying here is showing a bit of commitment to this video, because what we've done is put some sheep manure around the base of our trees here. And so we've kind of just sprinkled it on top of the mulch. You could probably pull the mulch back and sprinkle it on the soil to allow it to kind of break down quicker and have worms and stuff decomposing that around. but we kind of just did it the lazy way and just threw some sheep manure on top and figured that as it rains it's going to break down and eventually wash down into the soil anyway. But aside from that, we've obviously got the mulch here, which is going to break down over time. That's literally all we've done, and I'll probably look at trialing putting some cover crops around them, so some nitrogen fixing ones like the lupins that I did around in the food forest, because that's a good way to add some nitrogen to the soil by using material that you have or that you can grow. And so I'll probably just sow some seeds around here in the springtime, and then once I cut those cover crops back down, those will release a whole lot of nitrogen back into the soil and allow these plants to use that. But yeah, like these trees are pretty good, they won't need too much. Even just a bit of mulch is going to really help your trees out. Anyway guys, that pretty much does it from me today, but if you guys have anything to add, then feel free to leave a comment below with other tips or advice that you have about feijoas so that other people can read that. And if you want to learn more about feijoas, then feel free to check out the other videos I have here on my channel. And if you have any comments or questions, then please leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll see you down there. Hope you have a great rest of your day.